So UFC 305 just took place and it was a very fun card overall. I personally had a very good time watching it, and I'm going to recap the whole card, talk about the fights that happened, talked about my picks, what went right, what went wrong, and obviously talk about the results. I'm going to make it pretty quick because I have lost my voice and I've got a few videos to record today because I've got a test on Tuesday, so let's get through it pretty quickly. The first fight was a bit of a disappointment. Stuart Nickel lost to Jesus Aguilar in a fight which was clearly a layup for him. Now, I did actually say in my breakdown that I wasn't super confident in Stuart Nickel because I wasn't really too impressed with him, just because I think he is a very small guy for flyweight, and the fact that he's a wrestler is a little bit concerning. But I did think that Jesus Aguilar, who has been out-grappled multiple times in the UFC so far, would have been a layup for him, and unfortunately it wasn't. He lost in the first round, and losing in the first round to Jesus Aguilar in a guillotine as well. Guillotines, you don't really see them ever happen in the UFC anymore. Does worry me about how far Stuart Nickel can go in this flyweight division, because the UFC's flyweight division is very strong. So hopefully he can learn from this, rebound from this, but I did think it was a pretty sad performance to watch. Song Kenan versus Ricky Glenn was also a little bit of a sad fight as well. It was very, very slow. Glenn started out pretty hot by knocking down Song Kenan, and then Kenan kind of got it going a little bit with the strikes, but he was very, very slow. But every time he landed on Ricky Glenn, he did a lot of damage, and it almost felt like in multiple moments Song Kenan could have got the finish, but he just didn't. I wasn't too impressed by Song Kenan in this matchup. I think that he looked slow, and I think that any striker at 170 pounds with better cardio can probably capitalize on that. So definitely something to consider in the future. Another one is also Tom Nolan. He dominated Alex Reyes. Don't get me wrong, he did dominate the fight, but I do still think that there was some concerns, especially coming into the matchup as a minus 1200 favorite, a guy that was expected to get the first round knockout. He does make a lot of those early mistakes, which did lead him to losing to Nicholas Motta and losing his last fight, where he is just a little bit too aggressive. Now, he does have the cardio to keep it up, and that typically can be a problem for most people, but he does have the 3-round cardio to push the pace. But I think he still is just doing a little bit too much. You know, he's throwing spinning back fists when he probably shouldn't be. He's throwing spinning back kicks, which are cool and all, but if you're throwing 5 or 6 of them in a round, it's just a bit too much, and maybe someone who can time it can get a takedown off that, or just get out of the way, and it is like a move that does leave you somewhat exposed. I think that just doing too much was kind of the detriment to Tom Nolan in this one here. He still did dominate the fight nonetheless, but Reyes still had way too many moments. I do think that Nolan leaves himself way too open on the feet. Yeah, I think he just needs to kind of slow it down a little bit. He's got all the size, he's got all the skills there. It's just a bit much, and it kind of was a little bit of a concerning performance, I would say, considering the opponent. But it is what it is. He got the win. It'll be interesting to see who they match him up with next. Jack Jenkins, I think, looked very good. One of the more impressive performances on the card. Now, Jack Jenkins, I have been somewhat critical of him in the past because I did think that he had a pretty sad performance against Don Shainis and Jamal Emmers. I actually thought he lost to Jamal Emmers, and Don Shainis is terrible, and Jack Jenkins had a close fight with him. But Jack Jenkins went out there against Herbert Burns. The boxing looked better than it had ever looked before. The leg kicks were more effective than they'd ever really been before. And I think he showed really good fight IQ, because Herbert Burns was getting down to the ground, whether it was Jenkins knocking him down or him pulling guard or getting a takedown or whatever. And when Jenkins kind of had the opportunity to stand up and make Herbert Burns stand up, he did. And I'll get to that in a second with Josh Kulibau. But Jenkins, I think, fight IQ was there. The striking was there. I think he looked probably the best he ever has, to be honest with you. And it's kind of reigniting a little bit of hype that I had for him as a prospect. Casey O'Neill looked pretty good on the feet, kind of exposed Luana Santos's lack of striking, and in my opinion showed much better defensive wrestling and grappling than she's low-key ever showed before. I did pick Santos. Was it a bad pick? Yes, it was, but I don't really think it was necessarily the fraud check that a lot of people are going online and saying it is, because Santos did take this fight on short notice in Australia, so it is what it is. But I think for Casey O'Neill, her striking looked good, But I do still worry a little bit because, like, for the most part, she was just throwing overhands looking down at the ground. But the volume was there, the strikes were there, the takedown defense was there, and I think that if Casey O'Neill can keep the fight on the feet, she definitely does have a good chance at beating a lot of these girls in the rankings. So very happy to see Casey O'Neill get back after that losing streak. We can move on now to Ricardo Ramos versus Josh Culibao. I think Josh Kulibao's fight IQ just costed him his career. Ramos won the first round. You could argue maybe Ramos won the third round. I actually do think that Ramos won the third round, by the way. And that might be a controversial decision. But Josh Culibao clearly won the second round. And he clearly had Ramos hurt to the legs. And what happened was he dropped Ramos multiple times with leg kicks. And Ramos was on his back, you know, like Herbert Burns was. And Culibao just didn't step back and make him stand up so we could leg kick him again. He let Ramos recover for, I want to say, like 90 seconds, maybe longer, on the ground. And Ramos goes out there in the third round and wins. So Culibao letting Ramos recover, like literally choosing to let him recover, cost him the fight. And I think that Josh Culibao is probably going to get cut. He just lost to Ramos, who was on a losing streak and was probably going to get cut if he lost. And he also just lost to Danny Silva, who is a guy making his debut. So, yeah, I think that's probably the last we'll see out of Josh Culibao. He'll probably beat quite a few guys, I think, on the Australian regional scene because he is still talented, but you just can't be doing that, man. It was just a very frustrating watch. Volta Walker defeats Junior Tafa, somewhat controversial, and I know people in my comments are going to be saying stuff like, you picked Junior Tafa, Rara. Yes, he screamed out, and yes, it is a verbal tap, but the problem is with the ruling is that people have screamed in the past, and the fights continued. Like, Tony Ferguson versus Charles Oliveira in that legendary armbar is a obvious one. But yes, Junior Tafa screamed, and yes, the ref was correct to step in. I do think that if the fight went to the second round, though, there is a pretty decent chance Junior Tafa could have knocked him out, because in the first round, you could kind of tell that after Junior Tafa landed a couple of big shots, Volta Walker was like, oh shit, I can't strike with this guy anymore. But Volta Walker wins. I still think that he is a fade against people with better takedown defense. Now, I know that Junior Tafa has terrible takedown defense, and I did pick him to win, but it's just because his striking is so bad, and I think that still was showing today. And then we can move on to the main card. This is where the money was made. If you guys don't know, I have been placing bets on fights again, starting today, actually. It was a pretty big night for me. I think I turned $50 into like 140. 50 bucks into 150, I think, including the rugby last night. But yeah, doing the math, it's been pretty decent. Carlos Prates by KO was a big one for me. Knocked out Li Jingliang. I mean, I see a lot of people on Twitter saying that they don't like the performance from Carlos Prates because he was so not aggressive. That's fight IQ. That's what I wish every fighter that got a knockdown did. Carlos Prates was knocking down Li Jingliang all the time, and he wasn't following up on the ground. And the reason why is because he's not a grappler. All the time, these strikers that knock people down follow their opponents down to the ground and let their opponents like pull guard on them, hold them down, and then they recover. Carlos Prates never let that happen. That's actually good fight IQ. That's what you should see. But instead you see all these idiots swarming and jumping down on the ground against better grapplers and then losing. And Carlos Prates didn't do that. It was a brutal knockout as well. I feel like Li Jingliang actually ate like 5 or 6 fight-ending shots from Prates that would have finished anyone else. Li Jingliang still has a crazy chin. But man, the shot that dropped him was insane. Li Jingliang was out for a while. He was down. The first time Li Jingliang's ever been KO'd as well. And he took some big shots, man. He got knocked down multiple times. It was actually insane, the damage that Li Jingliang was taking, and he was just still coming forward. Topology's not loading, but that's what it is. Yeah, it was absolutely nuts. And then we can move up to Rosenstrike versus Tuivasa. I had money on Rosenstrike's money line. I know it was like minus 250 or something, but City Boys stay up anyway. I also did have KO props on him that didn't obviously cash, but Rosenstrike won the fight. One judge gave it 30-27 to Tuivasa. That judge ultimately got kicked off the judging panel for the co-main event because that is probably the worst scorecard that's ever been submitted ever. Worse than the Sanhagen versus Marlon Vera scorecard, I would say. Rosenstrike outlanded Tuivasa. I want to say the official numbers were like 3-1, 4-1. And even then, he was doing more damage, especially in round 2. He was landing some big shots on Tai. And round 3 as well was kind of the same. In fact, I think Tai didn't really do anything in round 3, really. So I think someone did give Tai Tuivasa round 1, which you could do, but even then, he still was outlanded like 2-1 in the first round. I guess the damaging shots went to Tai, but nonetheless, Rosenstrike won that fight in my scorecard 30-27. And he also won the scorecard on, like, probably every normal judge. And someone gave it to Tai 30-27. Makes no sense. One of the worst scorecards of all time. You probably won't see that judge ever judge a fight in the UFC again. And now we move on to Dan Hooker versus Gamrot. I don't understand how this is a controversial decision. I thought that Dan Hooker did win the fight pretty clearly. And people are saying it was a robbery. The argument is, it's damage-based scoring. What damage did Mateusz Gamrot do outside of the first round? You know, Dan Hooker did all the damage in round 2. All of the elbows were a big-time landing. He even dropped Gamrot and Heaven in trouble in round 3. And then he did more damage in round... and round 1. So, like, he did more damage, I feel like, overall. I scored at 29-28 to Hooker, based on the first and the third round, but I think that the judges that actually gave it to Hooker had it based on the second and the third round, so... Oh, well, I don't know. But yeah, I thought Hooker did more damage in round 1. I thought the knockdown was a slip. I thought it looked like a slip to me, anyway. And then I thought he did more damage in round 3 and won the fight in round 3 because he landed the better shots. Just Gamrot just didn't do any damage, and that's just what it comes down to, really. That's the scoring, and I had money on Dan Hooker by KO. He nearly had it in round 1, man. He really did. And then we move up to Kai Kara-France versus Steve Erceg. I really wanted to pick Kai Kara-France, and I didn't. I did pick Steve Erceg to win this matchup. I thought he was going to grapple. And once again, I feel like another kind of theme of this card is fight IQ wins fights. Erceg striked with Kai Kara-France for the whole fight. And Kai Kara-France is one of the better strikers at 125 pounds. You know, like, this is a guy that was giving Brandon Moreno trouble on the feet, you know? Yeah, and he's kind of given everyone trouble on the feet. And Steve Erceg's plan just was to strike with him. I thought that was weird. I thought it was an odd game plan. And Kai Kara-France ended up dropping him multiple times. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of nuts. I mean, it was a very impressive performance. I don't think you can give Kai Kara-France a title shot off it, though. And I think, pretty confident the UFC has other plans anyway for that. But I think Kai Kara-France, you give him a title eliminator. I'm not too sure who's booked at the top right now, but you could make something happen there. I think, like, Amir Albazi, a lot of people will be talking about. So maybe you could just do the rematch because the first fight was close and I thought it was a bad decision. So yeah, maybe you just do that. Just do the rematch. And now Dricus du Plessis beat Israel Adesanya. The City Boys are up. I had $20 on Dricus du Plessis to win, and he won. I thought that he looked sloppy, though. And that was kind of my breakdown, though, because I think in the breakdown I did say that Adesanya is clearly going to be the better striker. But just because Dricus du Plessis is just so pressure-heavy forward, and Adesanya struggled with the pressure of Strickland, I thought du Plessis was going to win. And, du Plessis won. I thought it was 2-1 in favour of Adesanya going into that 4th round, and the judges actually gave Dricus du Plessis 2-1, which is kind of interesting. I thought Adesanya was landing the better shots kind of throughout the fight, but I think it was round 2 that I gave du Plessis just because he had the top position on flattened out Adesanya and had the submission attempts, but also landed a lot of ground and pound in that moment, and landed really good shots in the clinch. But du Plessis comes back, he beats Adesanya. Adesanya, in my opinion now, I don't think Adesanya now could ever be the greatest middleweight of all time. I think he could have if he beat Dricus du Plessis, but now that he's lost to Strickland and du Plessis back-to-back, and he's lost multiple times now, I just don't think he can. So, yeah, big loss for Izzy, I think. Big loss for Izzy fans as well. Because you guys were going crazy online, but I stuck to my guns, I stuck to my GDP pick. Did he look like the better fighter in there? No. Du Plessis looked really, really sloppy. It was a really, really sloppy fight. Adesanya was looking better, like he always does, but the thing about Adesanya is that he'd never really fought someone with that kind of danger in the grappling and the wrestling before, and I knew that DDP was going to wrestle based on the Strickland fight. Now, he didn't wrestle as much as I wanted him to wrestle, because he attempted 11 takedowns against Sean Strickland, and that's what won him the fight. And the takedown numbers were probably pretty low, but every time DDP was moving forward, he would land a big shot on Adesanya, and it's almost like Adesanya just can't deal with pressure all that well, you know, because, I mean, that's how Strickland beat him, was pressuring him, making him move backwards. DDP, every time he rushed forward, he would land a big shot, and Adesanya would kind of look like he got a little bit hurt, or he'd stumble, or just wouldn't deal with it that well. But nonetheless, DDP won the fight as the underdog as well. Got him at underdog odds. Pretty good stuff there. And I think it's probably my only underdog pick off the card, but it is what it is. We've got the main event right, we've got the big one right. And yeah, with all that being said, let me know what you think in the comments below. This card was madness, man. Like, for me, like, I loved it because Dan Hooker won, Dricus du Plessis won, just fighters that I'm a fan of won. I mean, Tom Nolan won. I'm a big fan of Tom Nolan as well. Carlos Prates is kind of proving to be a massive problem at 170 pounds. Just overall, just a great card, and a card that I'm very much looking... I mean, the card's already happened. But fighters on this card that won, I'm looking forward to seeing where they go next. Adesanya, I don't know what you do with him, because I think that the UFC were trying to set up him versus Pereira at 205. Yeah, where does Adesanya go from here? Yeah. Like, does he fight Whitaker again? Does he fight, like, the winner of Cannonier Borrello? Like, does he beat Borrello? I don't know if he does. You can't deal with guys that move forward. So, yeah, probably a lot to work on for both guys. Dricus du Plessis, he doesn't look good, does he? But he just wins. It's crazy. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next one.